just completely freezes.
Total system lockup. I mean, the smile stays on your face, sure, but behind your eyes, an absolute panic sets in.
Yes. And it's not that you don't know the words. You know exactly what a weekend is. You know perfectly well what you did on Saturday.
Right, the vocabulary isn't the problem at all.
It's really not. But you are suddenly trapped in this bizarre, like, mental waiting room. You're desperately trying to grab the English word for weekend, and then you have to figure out the correct past tense for whatever verb you need.
Oh, and mentally arrange the entire sentence in your native language first.
Exactly. And then painstakingly translate it back into English before you actually open your mouth, all while the other person is just standing there staring at you, waiting for an answer.
It's agonizing. You are essentially forcing your brain to act as a real-time, simultaneous interpreter. And, I mean, that is an exhausting, highly cognitively demanding job for a trained professional.
Let alone someone who's just, trying to have a casual chat over a latte.
Right. It's just way too much pressure.
And that mental bottleneck is precisely what we are pulling apart today. Welcome to our deep dive on a guide titled, Why You Still Translate Everything in Your Head.
It's a great piece, really breaks down the mechanics of this issue.
It really does. So the mission for today's deep dive is to figure out the actual neurological and psychological root causes of that mental waiting room. We're going to examine why we get stuck and pull out 3 highly actionable strategies to help you respond naturally in English.
Right, so you can stop acting as your own internal translator.
Exactly. And the guide actually makes a really fascinating distinction right at the beginning that kind of fundamentally reframes the whole problem.
Yeah, the comparison between a struggling speaker and a fluent one. Because if you observe them both, the difference isn't just cognitive processing speed. It's not like the fluent speaker is just translating faster.
Right. So what's actually happening there?
Well, think about it. A struggling speaker is asked what they do after work. They pause. They say, after work, and then the mental gears just grind to a total halt.
Right, because they have to dig around for their native word for relax, match it to the English dictionary in their head, and finally stumble out with relax and watch television.
Exactly. The gears are practically audible, but the fluent speaker, they aren't just running that exact same translation algorithm at a higher speed. They're actually taking an entirely different neural route.
They're completely bypassing the translation process, aren't they?
Completely. When asked, what do you usually do after work? The fluent response just flows out. I usually go home, make dinner, and watch something on YouTube.
So they aren't building the answer in their native tongue first and then, like, smuggling it across the border into English.
No, not at all. They are initiating the thought directly in English.
Okay, so if the fluent speaker is bypassing translation entirely, they must be storing the language differently in their brain. And according to the guide, this translation trap actually starts on day 1 of language learning.
Yeah, it comes down to how we store vocabulary. I mean, think about how most of us were taught. We're taught to memorize single, isolated words.
Which the source points out is a massive structural flaw.
It really is. Think about a standard vocabulary list. You learn the word look. You learn the preposition for. You learn the pronoun something.
So you memorize them as 3 completely separate, isolated puzzle pieces.
Exactly. So when you're standing in a store and an employee asks if you need help, your brain's central executive, the part managing your active thinking, goes into overdrive.
It has to go into long-term memory and fetch I, then fetch am, fetch looking, fetch for.
Right, and it has to hold all of those individual pieces in your short-term working memory while simultaneously running a grammar check to make sure they're in the right order.
That sounds exhausting just describing it.
It is, and human working memory has severe limitations. Psychological studies, like Miller's Law, suggest we can only hold about 7 items plus or minus 2 in our working memory at any given time.
Wow, just 7. So if you're constructing a sentence word by word, you're maxing out your brain's RAM instantly.
Exactly. The cognitive load becomes so heavy that you freeze, the system crashes.
So the solution the source offers is to basically abandon single words entirely and learn in what they call chunks.
Chunks, yes. It's the absolute game changer here.
It's kind of like the difference between trying to build a house brick by brick while someone is standing there waiting for you to finish versus just bringing in pre-built walls, right?
That is a perfect analogy. A chunk is just a group of words that native speakers naturally use together. You don't assemble them on the spot, you just deploy them.
The guide provides some really useful examples of this too, like phrases such as, I'm not sure, but, or it depends on, or give me a second.
Yeah, so wait, let me make sure I'm getting the cognitive side of this. By memorizing give me a second, as a single chunk, am I effectively tricking my brain into treating a forward sentence as if it were just one giant, weirdly shaped vocabulary word? That is exactly the mechanism at play. Your brain treats that chunk as a single memory unit, so it only occupies one slot in your working memory instead of four.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly efficient.
Right. You don't have to parse the grammar, you don't conjugate the verb, you just retrieve the whole pre-built wall and set it down.
So if someone asks you, where do you want to eat?
Mm.
You don't need to panic and construct a perfectly translated thesis statement. You just grab the chunk. I'm not sure, and then finish it with a simple vocabulary word like, I'd like something warm.
Exactly. That phrase, I'm not sure, but I'd like something warm, gives you a quick, completely natural launchpad.
And it drastically reduces your cognitive load.
Huge reduction, which
Yeah.
frees up your brain's processing power to actually, listen to the person you're talking to, read their body language, and focus on the conversation.
Okay, so pre-built walls solve the assembly speed issue. But there's a second major hurdle the guide points out.
The mental middleman.
Yes, because even if I have these chunks loaded up in my memory, I still feel this intense psychological urge to run them through my native language first. Like, I want to translate "I'm not sure" back into my mother tongue, just to double check that it means what I think it means.
Right, it's like a safety blanket. We tether our English words to our first language instead of tethering them to reality.
So how does the neuroscience explain why we do this?
Well, let's say you see an apple. A native English speaker's brain sees the physical object and fires a direct electrical signal straight to the word apple.
Makes sense.
But a learner's brain sees the physical object, fires a signal to their native word for apple, and then fires a secondary signal over to the English word.
Which is just a massive, completely unnecessary detour.
It is, but the brain takes that detour because of myelination.
Myelination. Break that down for us.
So myelin is this insulating layer around your neural pathways that allows electrical signals to travel incredibly fast. Your native language pathway has decades of myelin built up. It's essentially an 8-lane superhighway.
Okay, so my native language is the superhighway. What's my English pathway?
Your English pathway is a bumpy dirt road in the woods.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so under the pressure of a conversation, your brain will always instinctively default to the heavily myelinated superhighway because it's faster and safer.
That makes total sense. So the big question is, how do we pave that dirt road?
The guide suggests a strategy called English self-talk. The whole goal is to connect the English word directly to the object, the image, or the action, actively cutting your native language out of the loop.
So skipping the superhighway entirely, how do we actually do that?
It involves quietly describing your immediate physical reality to yourself in English.
Like narrating my life.
Exactly. When you walk up to a door and open it, you just think, I'm opening the door. When you're looking around your desk for your phone, you think, where's my phone? When you take a sip of your morning beverage, you think, this coffee is hot.
I actually want to challenge you, the listener, to try the Sources interactive test right now.
Oh, this is a great exercise.
Yeah. So wherever you are right now, look at one object around you. You have 3 seconds to immediately describe it in English without translating it in your head first. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Did you do it?
If you manage to formulate a thought like, my bag is on the chair, or I'm using my computer, without visualizing your native language first, you just successfully fired a signal down that new dirt road.
You paved a tiny piece of the road.
I have to point out a funny contradiction here, though, with this advice.
What's that?
Well, we often think that mastering a language means having the ability to dive into deep philosophical debates, right? We want to discuss art, politics, the complexities of the human condition.
Sure, we want to sound smart.
Right. But this source insists on keeping it incredibly simple, like narrating the most mundane things imaginable. The room is quiet, or I need my keys. Why is mundane repetition the secret here?
It all comes back to that cognitive load we discussed earlier. When you try to think about complex philosophy in a new language, the cognitive strain is just immense.
So the brain panics.
Exactly. It panics under the weight of it and instantly jumps back to the highly myelinated native language superhighway to handle those complex abstractions.
Ah, I see. But when you look at your keys and think, I need my keys,
The cognitive load is virtually zero.
so you're basically sneaking under the brain's defense mechanisms.
You really are. You're successfully building a direct, unmediated neural connection between the physical object of the keys and the English word keys. You aren't translating, you are experiencing the physical world directly in English.
And the source recommends just 5 minutes of this simple self-talk every day, right?
Just 5 minutes. Over time, those tiny, mundane, direct connections build this massive foundation of instinctive English vocabulary that just doesn't require the middleman anymore.
5 minutes a day of narrating your life like a highly literal, somewhat boring documentary. I feel like that's super
It
achievable.
really is.
But, narrating my coffee is hot is fine when I'm alone in my kitchen. When we step out into the real world and interact with other human beings, we hit the third and, frankly, the most brutal trap mentioned in the guide.
Oh, the perfectionism trap.
Yes, the perfectionism problem.
Oh,
This is where psychology and ego come heavily into play.
definitely. The translation trap gets triggered immediately when you try to say something that is simply too complicated for your current English level.
Because as intelligent adults, we have incredibly complex, nuanced lexical networks in our native language.
Right.
We're used to signaling our intelligence, our humor, our social standing.
In our personality.
Exactly, our personality through our vocabulary.
Uh-huh.
So stripping all that away and speaking in basic sentences feels vulnerable. It almost feels humiliating, like we don't want to sound like toddlers.
Right. Linguists call that the linguistic ego. We desperately want our English output to perfectly match our native level intellect.
Which is a huge trap.
Huge. So when your adult brain tries to express a highly sophisticated thought and it can't find the exact English equivalent, it triggers a crisis. You retreat right back into that mental waiting room and try to force a perfect word-for-word translation of your sophisticated native thought into English.
And that is when everything breaks down.
Everything.
The source has a brilliant example of this. Imagine you went to a terrible dinner and you want to express this precise thought. I was extremely disappointed because the restaurant failed to meet my expectations.
I mean, that sentence is a translation nightmare.
It really is. It's
Yeah.
full of complex structural traps. Extremely disappointed, failed to meet expectations.
If you try to assemble those concepts from scratch in real time while someone is looking at you, you will freeze.
So what's the fix?
The key strategy the source introduces here is not to search for better vocabulary, but to intentionally do what they call making the message smaller.
Shrinking it down.
Yes, you shrink the complex thought down to its absolute foundational elements.
So instead of the complicated sentence about failing to meet expectations, you just say, I didn't like the restaurant, the food wasn't very good.
Exactly. Same basic message, infinitely easier English. It communicates the core truth of the situation without demanding advanced grammatical structures.
Okay, but let me push back on this a little bit on behalf of everyone listening who really values their identity.
Go for it.
If my authentic self wants to express deep, nuanced dissatisfaction, and I'm forced to just say, I didn't like the food, aren't I permanently trapping myself at an elementary level? I mean, doesn't shrinking the message mean we kind of lose our personality in the new language?
That is the central fear of the linguistic ego. It really is. But consider the alternative. When you try to force that complex, perfectly translated sentence, what actually happens in reality?
You probably stumble and sound super awkward.
Right. You end up sounding incredibly stiff, unnatural, and often you just stumble into a long, uncomfortable silence. The source uses a great example of someone explaining why they didn't cook dinner.
Oh, the exhausted one.
Yeah. The awkward, over-translated answer is, because I was exhausted, I lacked the motivation to prepare a meal.
Which sounds like a legal deposition.
It really does. It's technically correct. Sure, it has impressive vocabulary, but it is entirely devoid of human warmth.
It's completely unnatural for casual conversation.
Exactly. The native, natural way to express that sentiment is simply, I was tired, so I ordered some noodles.
And that flows perfectly. Ironically, it sounds far more like a native speaker than the complex dictionary version.
Communication beats perfect translation every single time. You aren't trapping yourself at an elementary level by shrinking the message. You're building the concrete foundation of fluency.
And once that foundation is automatic, the nuance naturally layers back in over time, right?
Absolutely. And, this principle of shrinking the message also applies to that terrifying moment when you simply forget a word mid-sentence.
Oh, the dreaded blank mind. That's the worst.
It happens to everyone, but if you're trying to say something and you forget the word umbrella, the instinct is to stop the conversation, panic, and frantically search your mental dictionary for the perfect translation.
But the source argues you should never stop.
Never stop. You talk around the missing word using the simpler vocabulary you already possess.
Like circumlocution elocution.
Exactly. Instead of freezing, you shrink the message and say, it's something you use when it rains.
Right. And if you forget the word crowded, you don't stall the conversation for 10 seconds. You just say, there were too many people.
The ultimate goal is continuous, unbroken communication, not a flawless vocabulary test.
Okay, so we have our 3 structural tools. We're learning in useful pre-built chunks so we aren't exhausting our working memory building sentences from scratch. We're using 5 minutes of daily self-talk to bypass the native language superhighway. And we're willingly swallowing our pride and shrinking our complex adult ideas into smaller, manageable messages.
That's the formula.
But how do we put this all into practice with burning out? Because, frankly, constantly suppressing your native language and circumlocuting sounds incredibly draining.
Oh, it requires immense cognitive energy. And the text offers a very crucial, highly practical warning right here. Thinking in English does not mean forcing yourself to use difficult English all day long.
Which is what a lot of people try to do.
They do, and if you are anywhere from a beginner to an intermediate learner, trying to completely think in English for 24 hours a day is just a recipe for severe cognitive fatigue. You will burn out and revert entirely back to your native language.
So what is the sustainable approach then? How do we build these new neural pathways without exhausting ourselves?
You start small. The solution provided is to start with isolated 10-second moments.
10-second moments. I like the sound of that.
Yeah. You take 10 seconds in the morning to describe your breakfast in your head. Or you take 10 seconds while walking to your car to look out the window and describe the weather. Keep it brief, keep it manageable, and let your brain recover.
And there's a massive rule the source drops regarding spoken practice, which I think is going to be a huge relief for anyone listening.
Oh, the grammar rule.
Yes. When you are speaking, do not stop mid-sentence every time you realize you made a grammar mistake.
Prioritize the flow of the message over the perfection of the syntax. Finish the message first. Analyze it later.
Because if you stop every time you use the wrong verb tense, you shatter the momentum of the communication.
You do. And worse, you accidentally train your brain to prioritize perfectionism over human connection. Just get to the period at the end of the sentence.
Let's actually walk through the simulated challenge from the text to see how liberating this can really feel. They call it the Sunday challenge.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a coworker asks you, "What do you usually do on Sunday?" We're going to apply our tools right now. No mental waiting room. No preparing the thesis statement in our first language. We start by deploying a simple, pre-built chunk.
Okay, so the structural chunk is
And then we add 2 simple activities that don't require heavy translation. I usually sleep late and have lunch with my family.
It occupies minimal working memory.
Yeah.
It's direct, and no complicated mental gymnastics are required.
Exactly. And then we stack one more sentence on top of it, starting with another highly common chunk.
Sometimes I meet a friend or watch a movie.
Right. So when you string it all together, you get a completely natural, fluent-sounding response that bypasses the native language entirely. I usually sleep late and have lunch with my family. Sometimes I meet a friend or watch a movie.
It doesn't need to win a Pulitzer Prize for literature. It just needs to confidently exit your mouth.
Exactly. Confident and unbroken.
You know, looking at these mechanics actually raises a really fascinating psychological question.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it's something to seriously ponder as you start actively applying these 3 tools. If you successfully execute this over the long term, if you manage to completely cut out your native language's complex lexical network, and you rely entirely on these simplified chunks and direct, unmediated observations, do you actually develop a slightly different English-speaking personality?
Wow. That is profound.
Yeah.
Because language and identity are so deeply, deeply intertwined.
Right. If you are actively, intentionally forcing yourself to shrink your highly complex analytical native thoughts into simpler, more direct English structures, does your English persona fundamentally become more direct?
Like, are you a slightly more straightforward, less over-analytical version of yourself when you skip the translation and speak directly from the chunks?
Exactly. Does changing the neurological wiring of how you process the language actually change how you present your identity to the world?
That is a wild, slightly intimidating, but honestly incredibly exciting thought to leave on. Definitely something for you to mull over the next time you're quietly narrating the temperature of your morning coffee. Definitely.
Well, let's quickly recap the journey we took today. We explored the mechanics of why we freeze, realizing that working memory just can't handle word-by-word sentence construction.
Right, and the solution is relying on those pre-built chunks.
Then we looked at how myelination forces us to use our native language as a mental middleman.
and how just 5 minutes of mundane daily self-talk can pave a direct dirt road to English fluency.
And finally, we confronted the linguistic ego.
Yes, acknowledging that shrinking our complex adult ideas into simpler messages isn't a failure. It's the ultimate strategy for continuous natural communication.
Just keep the conversation moving.
Remember, small sentences, repeated often, are going to become automatic. You don't have to be a real-time interpreter in your own head anymore. The mental waiting room is officially closed. You are ready to stop building sentences brick by brick. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating mechanics of language, and we will catch you on the next one.